Hello there, and welcome back to my painting channel. Today we've got a big one. Today we're going to do a Luke Skywalker painting. This one is going to be in his Bespin outfit, in his Bespin attire. And there's a few different ways that I've seen people paint this, or there's a few different colours rather. So I'm just going to give you kind of my interpretation of it. That doesn't mean that it's exactly spot on or correct, it's just a personal colour scheme really. But here's Luke, all primed and ready to go. So let's get started, as I always do, with the skin tones. And we're going to start with a KISLEV Flesh to keep everything nice and light. I tend to use KISLEV Flesh as a start-in base tone, so that the skin tones then tone back up to being a little bit brighter. I find if you start with darker tones, then sometimes it darkens your miniature down quite a lot. You'll also notice that I've primed Luke grey rather than using things like black. I find black to be a little bit overpowering for a base coat, for a prime, so I tend to use either grey or white, again because we get those colours to pop. And pretty much you just want to cover the face and hands with this KISLEV Flesh now. There you go, it's a nice thin even tone, so I'm not using the paint too thick to lose out on any of the details. It might require more than one layer. That's the nature of painting. You paint until you get to the even layer that you are comfortable with. So as always, we're going to move on to using the REIKLAND FLESHSHADE. The REIKLAND FLESHSHADE from Citadel is quite nice. This is it's a little bit warm in its tone, so when you tone down your flesh with this colour, it looks a lot more natural than using things like browns and things like that. We're going to try to make sure that the shade doesn't sit too much or pool too much in too many of the recesses. I don't mind it pooling in the eyes because, as a rule of thumb, I generally don't tend to paint eyes on miniature, just for the sake of not making them look too goofy and things like that. And that's fine. I mean, if you like painting eyes on your miniature, then you carry on. You know, it's just, like I said at the beginning, it's all personal choice. It's your miniatures, you can paint them however you like. So yeah, again, just covering the face and the hands, allowing that to dry down. Now, for the outfit, for the clothing, I've noticed that Luke's clothing seems to be quite like I say, there's a combination. Sometimes it looks cream, sometimes it looks like a light grey. So for the base colours, I'm using a Citadel RAKARTH flesh, and this is a sort of grey flesh tone, sort of a washed out flesh tone. So it's neither cream nor grey, but sort of I guess a hint of both. So this kind of suits the outfit quite well. As you can see, I'm using some nice thinned down colours here, so it will take a couple of layers to get it to the colour and the texture that we want, but that's fine, you know. Just wait for it to dry. Just make sure that we don't have bubbles in the paint. As you can see just up on the top part of the jacket there, I have a few bubbles which I'll iron out a little bit, because we don't want bubbles to dry in our paint. We don't want little holes and splodges all over the place. We want it to be nice and even and nice and clean, nice and crisp. And for this I'm covering both the trousers and the jacket. And it does take a couple of layers, as I say. And that's fine. So while we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to move on and just highlight the skin. So going back to the KISLEV Flesh and just picking out now the tones of the face and the hands, but trying to leave the paint in the recesses so that it creates a little bit of depth across the miniature. Again, with this being quite thinned down, some of the darker areas as well they'll show through to create depth on your miniature as well. I mean, you can paint this kind of like follow the lines and get a little bit of character back out of your miniature. So you could leave a small gap there or fill it back in depending on how you prefer to paint. Again, using thin paints is better. it's going to be smoother, the transition will be smoother, and they will dry out nice, even, crisp tones as well. We're going to do the same thing for the hands. Now, I don't particularly personally like the way that the lines are going across the front side of his wrists. I'm just going to cover those back over. They will show through, but very, very lightly because of how thin down the KISLEV flesh is on this. But I'm going to keep the darker shade in places like in his ears, where we're just going to pick up the tips, and across the fingers as well. So we're going to leave the darker shade in the recesses of the fingers, and just go across the knuckles and things just to highlight the raised edges. So it's nice, light, slow, little controlled brush strokes I find work better for myself. And it's always good to find yourself or put yourself into a nice sturdy position when you're painting, so that your lines, whether it be up or down or across, are nice and straight and nice and even. So for the boots, I'm going to move on to a nice brown. For this one I'm using a Vallejo Earth. This is quite a warm brown tone. Again, this is going to offshoot and stand out quite nicely against all of that RAKARTH flesh that we've used on the suit. So this is going to allow him to have a nice little bit of contrast, a nice little bit of depth between the outfit and his shoes. I'm not entirely sure what the Games Workshop or the Citadel equivalent of Earth is, so I tend to use Earth, or I'm using Earth in this particular painting as opposed to a Games Workshop equivalent. And I'm sure there is one, and you can paint these sort of boots however or whichever colour you prefer. It's just, for me, I find the nice warm tone on this Earth is perfect for this sort of suit. So yeah, and again, we've got it nice and thinned down, and a lot of control to it, and multiple layers and things like that. So I'm going to go on to just doing the leathers, so the pouches. Now, on the Bespin outfit of Luke, the leather pouches tend to be quite dark. So we are going to do something similar. We're going to start with the DRYAD bark, which I like to base coat a lot of leather with DRYAD bark. If you've seen a few of my other videos, you'll know that I base coat leather quite often with DRYAD bark, because it's nice and dark, but it's not too overpowering dark. It doesn't go so dark that you can't see detail. It stays, it's nice and dark, but it does keep those details as well in the miniatures, so you do get that nice blend of contrast between dark to light, and we'll see that as the miniature goes and as we paint. You want to be very careful with this, but again, because we haven't done too much detail work on the suit or the outfit, it doesn't matter too much if you make mistakes, because they'll be very easy to repair anyway by just going back to the RAKARTH flesh and just toning them back up. Just hitting the blaster holster there as well, and all of the pouches and the leather belt itself. I'm looking at different various images of Luke in this outfit. The belt buckle will be silver, and we'll do that a little later. Again, we're just focusing at the moment on getting these pouches to be of the base colour that they need to be. We're also going to use the DRYAD bark just to cover Luke's hair. Now, Luke's hair does vary from dark brown to light blonde in all different sources across the internet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to put a combination of both. So I'm going to base coat it with DRYAD bark so that it's dark, and then we're going to highlight it up twice to try to build the tones into a sort of sandy colour then. So we're going to go for a little bit of a lighter blonde on top with a darker tone underneath. So there we go, just moving on to the belt buckle. You can use LEADBELCHER for the belt buckle from Citadel. You can use an army painter, plate mail mammal. I'm also going to paint the lightsaber in silver, and there's a reason for this which I'll show you in a little bit. be careful with the bottom part of the lightsaber, especially around the back where his hands meet, because the lightsaber itself is still in there, but it is quite a difficult little area to get your brush into. So just be mindful and be careful as to where the silver needs to be. I'll show you just here, just a little bit of. See how his hands just underneath there is very, very difficult to get your brush in without hitting other things. So again, just be very careful, take your time, just try to hit those, just try to hit that little spot there, just in between his hands and across the bottom with that silver. See, I'm trying to be very, very gentle, just using a tiny little paint on the brush each time so that it builds up rather than going in with a splodge and ruining everything. So once we've got the base tones, we're going to do one of my favourite parts, which is covering him in a shade. Now for this I'm going to use AGRAX Earthshade, and we're going to cover the whole miniature apart from the skin and the lightsaber in the same tone. And this way it's going to build those tones together, so it's going to hold the browns, the RAKARTH flesh that we've got on the suit, the belts and the darker stages all together into one. So this is going to get into any of the cracks and creases that maybe we've missed by painting, and it's a great way of toning your miniature back into showing the darker side on the outfit. So again, for contrast. And we'll build up the lighter tones and things a little bit later. Just try to be a little bit careful when you're doing the inside of his jacket, because of both of his hands holding that lightsaber out in front of him. It can be a little tricky getting the brush into that crease or in between that area. So just again, take your time, try to be a little bit more gentle with your brush strokes, and try not to hit the hands and the lightsaber and things. But again, we can fix those if there's any mistakes, so don't worry too much. There we go, we want that shade just to sit in the recesses, just so that we can try to build up a little bit more of that character and seeing how the miniature is flowing. I do particularly like this miniature with the way that he's holding the lightsaber. The design shows that the jacket up on top, that the flowing motion of the miniature does add to the sort of heroic stance to it, which is really, really nice. And try not to let it pull too much in areas. I mean, you can allow it to pull in some of the bits that you want to create a little bit more depth, and as long as you've got control over it, that's fine, but just try not to let it be too many big sort of pooled points. So there we go. Now that he is all based up in AGRAX, I'm just going to use a little bit of Nuln Oil, which is a black shade. I'm going to use that just across the lightsaber, and that's just to tie the silver towards the hands and things like that, just to make things look a little bit more even. There we go, so that it sits nicely between the hands and the saber. So now that everything is dry, we're going to go back to the RAKARTH flesh, and we're just going to start to pick out the highlights. Now with this you want to be very gentle, very careful, and what I tend to do is, or what I've done with this is I'm just picking the direction that the jacket is moving. So just picking the direction that his coat is flowing, and I'm just following those lines. So I'm following the flow of the miniature. So that adds to the dynamic pose, essentially, as opposed to painting back over the top and losing those darker points. What we're trying to do is hit those raised areas without looking at the recessed pooled areas, the darkest points. And it doesn't matter if you see brush strokes and things like that, because it is a painted miniature, it's hand painted, you kind of want to show off like the fact that you've painted it. So sometimes a few little brush strokes can be quite they can be quite good, because it does show people the effort and the amount of time and work you put into your miniature as well, and it gives you a little bit of a creative style as well. But again, that's all personal choice. You know, you can make your miniature a lot sharper, a lot cleaner if you like. But as you can see, we build in those lines across, and it's just adding to that motion of the way that jacket is just sort of pulling across his shoulders. There you go, just gently trying to hit those recessed points. It can be a little tricky, it does take a little bit of time, so practice a little bit on any miniatures that you might have, like spares or anything like that, if you don't feel too confident. But generally, just have fun with it. Just take your time and pick out those bits so that we build in that colour back up, as you see, and across the collar as well. So I'll show you a similar sort of thing just across the bottom here, because the AGRAX Earthshade is dried and pooled just around the pouches. So I'm going to paint around that. Not cover the pouches or things like that, but we're just going to tidy up and neaten up where that has dried. And again, following the dynamic pose, following the way that the trousers and his legs actually move, we're going to build this tone up. Again, with thin down paint, so that it doesn't go over too much of your miniature, sorry. There you go, so just hitting areas, hitting points, trying to catch where the light is just reflecting, catching where the light would sit on the miniature itself. Again, this is all very dependent on sort of style and how you'd like to paint. So for me, like I say, I enjoy sometimes having a few of the brush strokes showing. For others, you might want it to be a lot smoother. So yeah, it's entirely dependent on you. We're going to do the same thing with the boots or the shoes. And we're just going to go back and we're just going to pick out the highlighted areas back with the same earth tone that we used, so the base colour, and that's just to give it a little bit more depth, because that AGRAX Earthshade is quite dark. It would have darkened the original colour down, so I'm just going to bring that back up here. I'm just going to try to hit the highlighted areas as much as possible. And I mean, it benefits you to take your time and just pick out little bits so that it brightens up. So for the leather pouches then, just to give them a little bit of a leather effect, we're just going to move on to a DOOMBULL brown. When this is thinned down, this does dry quite nicely, but it doesn't overdo or take away from the original DRYAD bark layer, which is quite nice because you still have that sort of worn out leather kind of effect where you've got the darker point and then you've got the lighter point, so it's almost as if the edges and things are just worn down by the age of the pouches and the fact that they are made from leathers. I'm just trying to avoid those dots and cover those over with silver a little bit later. Just hitting the raised point of the belt. As you can see, his holster is holding across on that one as well. I'm just going to go across the holster. As you can see, the DOOMBULL brown is nice and thin, so this means that there is going to be elements of that DRYAD bark showing through, and again that's going to create that leather effect. There is a strap going across the leg as well for the holster. As you can see, it's just going across the pocket on his right leg, which again we'll hit that with a little bit of the DOOMBULL brown, and that will help to break up the single tone going down the legs and the outfit as well. See, nice control brush strokes, nice and gentle, just using the tip of the brush. There's no need to go too extreme. Now this is why we painted the lightsaber silver earlier, is because there's a few different ways that you could paint the lightsaber, and I know a lot of people do cut the lightsabers off and put lights in them and things like that. I've never done anything like that before, so I opted to do something that was a little bit different. So for this I'm going to try to paint the lightsaber blue, because as at this point Luke is still using his father's lightsaber. So what we're going to do is use the technical Soulstone blue. This is a strange one to use, because if you put this on very thick, it shines. If you put it on quite thin, it shows the silver through the underneath. So you kind of get a little bit of a reflection from the silver below, which kind of makes the blue reflective. Now because of that, there's a few different ways you can do it. You can either put one tone on, one layer on, and leave it with the blue showing, the silver showing through, or you could put multiple layers on and just have it as the blue itself is shining. And that is completely up to you. Now for me, I've covered it in the blue to make it thicker, and I'm going to go back and highlight that a little bit later. But for now, whereas we've used the RAKARTH flesh, we're now going to highlight and hit certain points and certain highlighted edges with the FLESHHADE one flesh. So this one now is a lot more cream. So like I was saying, with there being a lot of like different resources and different versions or different colours as to how to get this suit to look in a certain way. Whereas the RAKARTH flesh underneath shows a grey sort of fleshy tone, this one now is going to give a little bit of a cream highlight. So again, we're giving ourselves a multiple layer colour scheme, so that it kind of ticks the boxes for both the grey and the cream. And this one, you kind of want to take your time with this layer, because this is quite, you know, you just kind of want to hit more of the raised areas. You don't want to cover as much with this as we did with the RAKARTH flash. This one is just going to be hitting, you know, sort of just a little bit of a less of an extreme tone then. I mean, you could just leave it as RAKARTH flash. If you don't want to go and highlight further, you can leave it as you have, and you can be happy with him on the table, you know, with just the one tone. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Like I say, they're your miniatures. If you're feeling confident and you want to highlight further, you can. I mean, you could even highlight further than what I've done as well. So moving on to the boots again. This time, what I'm doing is I'm just going across the boot wraps. So we're not going to go around the straps that are covering the boots. We're just going to hit the boot points. Now for this, I'm using a flat earth from Vallejo, and this is very similar to the earth, but it's just slightly lighter or a slightly different colour in its tone. So again, it's giving me a little bit more to look at than just one flat colour. This is kind of giving us 2 or 3 different tones. So you've got the base colour, you've got the shade with the AGRAX, and then you've got this as well. And like I say, I'm avoiding the straps themselves that go in round. So with the hair, we're going to just dry brush very, very lightly. And when I dry brush, I always tell people less is more. So make sure that you dry brush very, very lightly, because if you make any mistakes or if you don't put enough on, as you build and as you tone, you can add more dry brushing if you need to, but you can't remove it. So always try to dry brush in small increments, and try to make sure that when you dry brush in, you just hit in the edges that you want. So as you see now, with this one, we're using a beige brown from Vallejo, and this one is a slightly lighter tone brown. So like I said earlier, we're going to go with the DRYAD bark as a base, then we're going to use this one as a mid-tone, and then we're going to highlight this one slightly further then as well, so that it creates that tone between dark brown to a sort of lighter blonde, but without going too yellow or too extreme. So again, with the boots, I'm going to a Army Paint, a soft tone. Again, you could use the AGRAX Earthshade if you wanted to, but the reason why I've switched tones here is AGRAX Earthshade darkens down quite a lot, whereas soft tone doesn't darken as much. This just creates a little bit of a tone. So that's the only reason for the switch, but they are both brown shades or brown washes, you know, whichever word you prefer to use. So again, now going back to the hair, using our dry brush, for this one, another Vallejo again. And for this one is a green ochre. So this one is a sort of khaki colour, or an off khaki colour. It's a bit of an odd colour choice, the green ochre. So you don't need to have a green ochre if you don't have a green ochre. If you're using Citadel, you could use something like a sandry dust. That would actually be perfect. You know, that's the exact kind of colour that we're looking for. Is a more of a khaki colour. So a sandry dust, a Vallejo khaki, those would work equally as well. It's just I have this green ochre in my painting rack, and I thought this would be quite a nice little colour tone above the browns. There you go. So that should give us like a 3-tone colour between the hair, meaning that there's a lot more depth to it as well. For his blaster, we're just going to cover this black. I tend not to paint black very often because I find black detracts a lot of detail. There are special ways that you can paint black, but personally I would prefer not to paint black. I'd prefer to paint like a darker grey and build up from there and lighten things up. But for this exercise, black will be fine because we're only going to paint the blaster. Just struggling with my focus. Apologies with the focus. There we go, just trying to hit that blaster. We don't want to go too much over the top. We don't want to break apart from the blaster and then hit our clothing. So I'm just trying to be as careful as possible. So there you go, painting the blaster black. You're going to go back and do the metals. I mean, you could go back to the LEADBELCHER that we used originally, but I'm just going to use the Army Painter plate metal because this one has a nice shine to it. I'm just going to paint the belt buckle and all of those little buttons across the pouches. This is a very fiddly little job, so be very, very careful. Try to be as careful as possible. With the same silver, I'm going to dry brush silver over the top of the black bolter. Just to kind of retrace some of the colours and some of the edges. Now with the lightsaber, so like I said earlier, I've toned it in with the special technical paint. And what I'm doing now is I mixed the technical paint with a lighter paint of TECLIS blue, and I'm just dotting this on now. So I'm just trying to dot this in stages and in patches, not to cover too much, so that it gives almost like a broken effect on the lightsaber, because a lightsaber and a light source wouldn't be just one colour. It would be, or rather in this case, it's multiple sort of tones, especially with a lightsaber. When you see them in the movies, they highlight around a certain point where the light is the brightest. So what I'm trying to do, as you can see with the lightsaber now, is toned in a different sort of way. Now to give a small element of OCL, or directional lighting, I'm also very, very, very lightly dry brushing some of that TECLIS blue just across the one side of Luke's hair. So we are just picking out on those lighter tones of the hair to make them look a little bit blue. So it's almost as if that lightsaber is reflecting on his hair. You can do this across sort of the arms and things like that as well. I've chosen not to, just to limit the amount of, or to continue and keep the amount of control that I've got on the miniature. Because I tend not to dry brush too much. I only dry brush in small areas and small patches. You might see a little bit around the collar, where I've also put a little bit of the blue, but that's about it. I think subtlety is key. Going back to the lightsaber and what I've done with the dot, so the TECLIS blue, the SOULSTONE blue, I've now highlighted that slightly with a little bit of white scar from Citadel. I mean, you can use any white, but this is just to lighten it as well as we get to the middle point. So I'm trying to make an effect where the middle is lighter than the edges. Whether that's right or wrong for a lightsaber, I'm not sure, but it'll look cool at the end. We're going to have a really cool sort of different kind of effect out of our lightsaber, which will make Luke stand out. And I'm going for a further highlight with the white then as well, so I'm adding a little bit more white to the mixture, and again just hitting the middle part so that it builds and tones lighter into the middle rather than on the edges, and I think that'll be quite a cool effect for our Luke. And once you've hit that and we've kind of got that light area in the middle of the lightsaber, that should be all we need. I mean, Luke should be good enough for the table, and he should look really, really good at the head of your rebels leading an assault. So with that done and with that complete, this is how Luke should look. The miniature is really, really nice. There are a few little imperfections, but you can use those to your advantage. And as I say, sometimes painting with the brush strokes and showing those brush strokes is lovely as well, because it shows the effort that you've put in, and it shows that it is hand painted, which a lot of the time with models, that's kind of what you're going for. You kind of want your model to look like you've had an input on it and you've made your own creative imprint on it. So as always, friends, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all the likes and subscribes that you've given me.